Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole, the 4th District in Oklahoma. This is another one of our weekly chats about what's happening in Congress. This has actually been an extraordinarily busy week in Congress, and that's not unusual as you approach the end of the period that you're going to be in session before an election. A lot gets done. Most important single thing this week was probably the passage of the so-called continuing resolution. That simply means that the government will remain funded. There's no risk of a shutdown through December 11th. This is obviously to get us through and past the election and to make sure, obviously, the time of national crisis and tension with COVID-19 and with the election very much up in the air, that the essential services of government remain in place for everybody. I'm pleased to say it was a big bipartisan vote, substantial majority on each side in the House. The Senate's not yet passed it as we're speaking today, but they will. And so, again, no government interruption. I'd say the second most important thing in terms of Congress was the revival of some discussion about another coronavirus relief bill. It's hard to tell whether or not this is serious or not, but the House is certainly going to consider a measure next week. The Speaker has directed it to be put together. It's smaller than the so-called HEROES Act that Democrats passed on their own, frankly losing 15 of their own votes in May. So it's a little more reasonable, but the two sides are still several $100 billion apart. But they've inched closer together, so there's a chance of a deal next week, or there's a chance of no deal. I think probably ongoing concern over the economy may push the sides together. But again, at the end of the day, this has to be more of a compromise probably than Speaker Pelosi would like. You have a Republican Senate and you have a Republican president. And they're 2/3 of the equation. And they've already moved off their numbers toward hers. They're not likely to go all the way to the 2.2 or $4 trillion bill she wants. And the sad thing here is that the two sides agree on so much. Well over 1.23, maybe even up to $1.5 trillion of additional spending. Conservative Republican, that's a big number for me and hard, but I recognize we have lots of people still suffering, lots of folks unemployed, lots of struggling small businesses, frankly, real needs in terms of money for the distribution of a vaccine, which is coming on pretty rapidly. Our hospitals remain under stress. So we're not through COVID-19 yet. We've made a lot of progress. I think you're going to see vaccines, frankly, by the end of the year, and I think you're going to see them widely distributed by the spring of next year. But again, I think the economy probably needs an additional shot in the arm. Republicans in the Senate think that. They voted for that last week. Obviously, Democrats think so. The president thinks so. He's been urged Republicans to actually move their numbers up a little bit. So with everybody thinking something needs to get done, it would really be regrettable if nothing got done, if somebody was so entrenched they couldn't move. In this case, actually, the president has moved, and I think the Senate has, frankly, been signaled it's willing to move. It really gets down to whether or not the Democrats will accept something rather than continue to demand that we have to agree on everything before we do anything. That's a silly way to govern, and it's using the American people who are suffering a lot as leverage in this. Third big development, actually, and I think this was actually hopeful, was the Republicans laid out their positive program for the November elections, the Republicans in the House. We're in a pretty negative presidential campaign. That's no big surprise. And we're in a pretty negative campaign for Congress and for the Senate. That's no big surprise. So it's refreshing for me to see Republicans put out what they actually plan to do. And they've broken this into a three-part agenda that has literally dozens of proposals under each of the main entitles. The first one is just simply to restore America. And you restore our way of life first by getting a vaccine done. And as I've said before, that's an area we've made enormous progress, and it's been bipartisan, but particularly the president with Operation Warp Speed deserves most of the credit. The administration has done this well. We're going to have multiple vaccines available before the end of the year. And this is going to be the fastest in human history that vaccines in a major disease have ever been made available, first to the American people and then to people all over the world. So that's a big project, and Republicans have been heavily engaged in that, and I think could take a lot of pride in that. We'd like to also rebuild America. That's everything from major infrastructure programs to actually trying to get our economy back to where it needs to be. We've got dozens of proposals, positive proposals in terms of deregulation, tax reform, and what have you, a major infrastructure program, all of which will put more and more Americans back to work and get us back to the prosperity that we had as recently as February, when we had literally the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, the highest consumer confidence rate in a generation, and the fastest growing wages for all workers that we've had since before the Great Recession. That's something that President Trump and Republicans did before. That's something we're comfortable that we can do again. And finally, we're looking at something we call renewing America. And that's simply to build on the basic values that we have as a country. You know, we believe every parent ought to be able to decide where their kids ought to go to school. I'm a product of the public school system. I'm proud of that. My son teaches in the public school system. That's where most people, frankly, go to school, and where most of their kids go to school. But I also want to make sure that homeschoolers have an opportunity to do well. I want to know that people, if they think a charter school or a private school or a religious school is the right choice for them and their children, they need to have that ability to do that. We know parental involvement is the key to a good education. So I look forward to working to do that. We also know long-term we're going to have to shore up our entitlement system. Look, Social Security and Medicare are going broke. So anybody that says making no changes as them is basically telling you to let them go broke. I think we're going to have to look at those, and our commitment to America actually says we're going to do it in a bipartisan way. We're not going to try and cram some scheme down people's throats. We're going to work with the Democrats. The last time we shored up Social Security is when Democrats and Republicans worked together with Ronald Reagan, and that was increased revenue as well as internal reforms. We're going to have to do something like that again, or all these programs are going to disappear, and that would be a catastrophe for America's seniors and a catastrophe for Americans of low income that depend on Medicaid. So again, those are things we can work together on, and if we don't, they're going to run out of money. So I was pretty pleased with the agenda overall. I can go through in great specifics, or you can just go to the website, which is commitmenttoamerica.com, and pull up the specific proposals. But I'm pleased that Republicans in this period of a contested election are trying to all put forward a positive vision, as well as simply be critical of the Democrats or the opposition at the presidential level. I think that's a good thing. Finally, let me end with a sad note, but I think an important note. Obviously, we know we lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg, an icon on the Supreme Court, a person who, frankly, I disagreed with on occasion. Certainly much more liberal than I am, but I think you had to admire the quality of her legal work. She's undoubtedly one of the great legal scholars of the era. And I think you had to admire her as a person who persevered and overcame barriers, that frankly was a cultural icon, probably as much as a political or philosophical icon, and a real loss to the country, no question about it. And so I grieve for her and her family, and certainly for her many friends and admirers across the political spectrum. It's interesting to me that in this divided time, she and the late Justice Scalia were the best friends on the court. They were polar opposites philosophically, and yet they admired one another personally, and they respected one another's intellectual work. It would be better for America if all of us operated the same way that the late Justice Scalia and the late Justice Ginsburg operated with one another, disagreeing and yet recognizing the quality and the argument on the other side, and more importantly, the quality of the person presenting that argument. That's an important message for all of us. This has launched a very intense Supreme Court struggle. Frankly, as a member of the House of Representatives, we're spectators in this just the way every other American is. This is one where the House doesn't have a vote. But I would expect the president will nominate someone. That's his constitutional obligation. That's always been done, no matter what. We've had 29 different nominations during a presidential year. If we lose somebody on the Supreme Court through retirement or sadly death, then the president's obligated to fulfill his constitutional responsibility and present a nominee. I'm sure that he will. And then it gets down to the United States Senate. And the reality is, if the president and the Senate are the same party, that nominee has almost always been confirmed. If they're of different parties, then usually the nomination has been deferred until after the election, or certainly most times until the new president takes over. But in this case, you have a president of the same party, you have a Senate of the same party. The Supreme Court was a major election issue in 2016 for President Trump. It was a major issue in 2018 when the current Republican majority was created and when they actually enlarged their majority by 2 seats. So I suspect that the president will make a nomination, and if that nominee is a qualified person, which I expect it will be, then the confirmation will proceed apace. And it's going to be very intense, very divided, very partisan. I recognize that. I would just urge us all to recognize there's nothing unusual about the constitutional norms carrying themselves out. This is pretty much the way it works. And remember that perhaps we ought to go back to the example of the late Justice Scalia and the late Justice Ginsburg and recognize people of goodwill can differ on these kind of issues. We have a system where it can be worked out, will be worked out, according to constitutional norms and values. So again, that's something we're not involved in the House of Representatives. We're going to be focused on, again, trying to make sure that if we can get to a coronavirus relief bill, that we will, and that bill be bipartisan in nature and one of compromise. And then we'll, keep working like everybody else toward the election. Let the American people make the final decision. I suppose I will make one final point. I have great confidence in election officials all across the country, certainly in the state of Oklahoma. I know them. I've been involved in elections. You can count on the Oklahoma Election Board doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and that is making sure as many people as possible have an opportunity to vote, and that those votes are counted fairly and accurately and reported fully to the public in Oklahoma and to the public across the country, because they'll be interested in what's happening in our elections, not just presidentially, but at the federal level as well. And I happen to think that that's going to be true in every other state around the country too. So I think while people are suspicious on both sides and they're always worried that the elections are going to be tampered with, I have a lot of confidence that election results that we get on November 3rd, it may take a few days after that because there's going to be so much voting by mail, will be accurate. And I trust the election officials in each state to make an accurate call. They have last time, and that resulted in a surprise victory for President Trump. I think they will this time, and I don't hazard a prediction. I think it's going to be a very close election. But just most important, wherever you're at in the political spectrum, please go out and vote. Please listen to the candidates. Make your decisions. They're important decisions. And I hope you participate fully in the political process. And I hope you have confidence in that process as well, because the men and women who run it, the men and women at your precinct if you go to vote, or the men and women that handle the mail at the state election board and other voting entities all across the country are honorable people. They're going to do the right thing. We will get a result, and I think we will have a peaceful inauguration no matter what happens, and it'll be on time, and it'll reflect the will of the American people and the electoral system under which we operate. So with that, please be safe. Look after yourselves, continue to wear those masks, continue to socially distance, continue to wash your hands. But know, thanks to an extraordinary effort, we're moving toward the day when every American that wants a vaccine can have a vaccine, and it's going to be sooner rather than later. So good luck, God bless, and look forward to talking to you next week.